Climate Reality is brought to you with the kind compliments of Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
Good evening and welcome to episode 8 of Our Climate Reality. This evening we're looking at extreme weather events, and of course extreme weather events, one of the main things that can occur as a result of climate change. This evening with us we have meteorologists from the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, Mr. John Peters, and Ms. Elizabeth Emmanuel from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. We have quite a lot to discuss. As a matter of fact, we hope to be able to share with you what is meant by extreme weather, the types of extreme weather that we experience here in the Caribbean, and more. So stay with us, we have a lot to share with you. One of the most visible consequences of a warming world is an increase in the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. The National Climate Assessment finds that the number of heat waves, heavy downpours, and major hurricanes has increased in recent years, and the strength of these events has increased as well. A measure of economic impact of extreme weather is the increasing number of billion-dollar disasters which have occurred. Climate change is expected to worsen the frequency, intensity, and impacts of some types of extreme weather events. For example, sea level rise increases the impacts of coastal storms, and warming can place more stress on water supplies during droughts. Over the 39-year period from 1979 to 2017, the number of major hurricanes has increased, while the number of smaller hurricanes has decreased. Warmer sea temperatures also cause wetter hurricanes, with 10 to 15% more precipitation from storms projected. Recent storms, such as Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which dropped more than 60 inches in some locations, Florence in 2018 with over 35 inches, and Imelda in 2019 with 44 inches, demonstrate the devastating floods that can be triggered by these high-rain hurricanes. To avoid the worst impacts moving forward, communities in both coastal and inland areas need to become more resilient. When we come back from the break, we will be chatting with our guest on extreme weather events. Stay with us.
Hubbard's big promotion is here again. It's the Hubbard's Live Free for 1 year promotion. More fun, more prizes to be won. Cuatro, punto, cero.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We going green to be healthy. We going green for security. We going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. We going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3.
Thinking about your new home? Think easy. Think a Republic Bank Home Easy Loan. Think affordable. Think convenience. Think Republic.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3. Republic makes home easy.
Wow, that was such a breeze.
Own your home with ease.
So whether laying that first brick or purchasing an existing home, we've got you covered. Republic Bank will get you those keys hassle-free in no time.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3.
Apply for a Home Easy Loan today for a chance to win a cash prize. Getting your new home is easy with Republic Bank.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back. It's Our Climate Reality, and of course, we welcome you, our viewers on GBN Television 711, our friends on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, and of course, our listeners on K105 FM. As I told you before the break, we have two very special guests with us, and we're discussing extreme weather events. Of course, these can occur as a result of climate change. Mr. John Peters, a meteorologist with the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, and of course Ms. Elizabeth Emmanuel from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. We're going to ask our guests to just share with us a little bit about themselves before we get into our discussion. And of course, we will start with Ms. Emmanuel. Liz, good evening and welcome to the program. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, good evening, Godfrey. Speaking to you and your listeners from Jamaica, because as you know, CRIF is a virtual company, so we're scattered all over the globe, in fact. I currently head the facilities technical assistance portfolio, as well as its corporate communications portfolio, as well as support or lead the development of training programs in disaster risk financing. Through CRIF, I am able to engage with our 19 member countries in the Caribbean, 3 countries in Central America, as well as our recent members, which are public utility companies, 2 public utility companies in the Caribbean. And of course, as your viewers would know, and if not, we work in the area of disaster risk financing and parametric insurance. I'm happy to be here today to share with you what we're doing with respect to a changing climate and how we're supporting countries to reduce the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. And of course, when we're talking extreme weather events, insurance is very, very important. And of course, a little later on in the program, we'll be hearing a lot more about that. Mr. John Peters, a good colleague of mine. There's so much I can tell you about myself and Mr. Peters. But tonight, it's a different setting. And so, John, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. Tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are.
Good evening, Godfrey. Good evening to listeners, the GBN. Yes, my name is John Peters. I'm speaking to you from Barbados, where I'm attached with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. We are the regional training center that provides training for meteorologists from the different levels. So I am the coordinator for the entry and mid-level of the technicians who do the meteorology. So I'm here at your disposal. I know you have some interesting questions regarding climate and climate change. So that's it.
Thank you, John. And actually, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. We're talking extreme weather. Let's put this whole thing into context. Of course, we know weather. Rain comes, the sun shines, all of that. But when we talk extreme weather, we are going a little beyond that. John, tell us what is meant by extreme weather and what types of extreme weather is caused by climate change.
Well, simply put, and as the word would suggest, extreme weather means that it's weather events that are occurring outside of the norm, but it's relative to a particular place, a particular time. So, for example, we in the Caribbean, we have what we call the wet season and the dry season. So if we have an extreme weather, for example, from a seasonal standpoint, what you expect in the dry season is probably a low amount of rainfall. But what if you have high amounts of rainfall? So that's a seasonal extreme. But within a particular season, you could have severe weather. So for example, even in the wet season where, for example, let's say we expect a rainfall amount of, say, on average, 200 millimeters, say in September. What if you get 400 millimeters? That is an extreme within the particular season. So we can look at it from a standpoint as to relative to place and time, what is happening outside of the norm.
Right. So we understand that. Let's talk about the Caribbean and the extreme weather that we experience here, and how are we experiencing that as it relates to climate change?
Okay, so in terms of weather and what drives weather, one of the fundamental important factors that we have to look at that really drives your weather is temperature differential, right? Whenever we have difference in temperature from one place to the next, especially if it is within close proximity, that could trigger and drive the other parameters in the weather. So it can trigger higher temperatures, heat waves. We can also see rainfall drought. We could have gluts in the rainfall amounts, higher winds. Our tropical weather systems like storms, hurricanes, they can be even a little more intense. So these are the areas for us in the Caribbean that we may want to pay particular attention to. Rainfall amounts, the tropical storms, hurricanes, how intense are they? So these are the main weather events when we in the Caribbean are talking extreme weather. But these could also have an impact on, for example, the ocean and its behavior, because the atmosphere and the ocean, they interrelate as to the impact of the atmosphere it has on the ocean can increase your sea level and things like that.
Right. John, the extreme weather, and as I said earlier, we understand weather. And you did say that we have, of course, a wet season and a dry season in the Caribbean. But when we have these, extreme weather, and in our case, the hurricanes, they're very prevalent in our region. What about climate change is causing these weather systems to become so intense and so extreme?
Well, the thing is, I may put a little twist to this, because when we talk about climate change and even climate variability, we can't speak those language without looking at the importance of data collection, how, the precision of the data we collect, and then make analysis of them. I say this to say, for example, we are seeing now increase in our data network, right? The capturing of data, we have much more compared to the past. And I could put it this way, for example, we are seeing more digital formatting of our data, the capturing of our data. And just think of it, you, Godfrey, being a former athlete, and someone is clocking the 100 meter, using the human element to make that judgment compared to the digital. So we are saying that we're having more precise data collection. How do we analyze this data to ensure that, one, is it the climate is changing, or is it that we are changing the climate? I like to see it that way, right? And when we speak that language, then we'll understand the extent to which climate is changing or not changing.
Right. Liz, is there anything you would like to add here based on what John has said?
I think part of it as well is to also bring in the human element of climate change. And from where we sit at CRIF, we are seeing an increase, as mentioned before, in the frequency and intensity of these hydrometeorological events, and really seeing how they are impacting people, economies, lives and livelihood throughout the Caribbean. And we need to look at this also within the context that globally in the Caribbean, we are one of the most disaster-prone regions of the world. And we're also considered to be, some of our islands, in fact, considered to be the most vulnerable. Of the 20 most vulnerable islands in the world, at least 5 of these are in the Caribbean. For example, Belize, Jamaica, Bahamas, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But these extreme events that, John spoke about, and really in terms of the devastating impacts of these events, they are resulting in significant economic losses. And if we think of hurricanes like Maria, in fact, if we go back to 2017, which like 2004 was a watershed event for the Caribbean. When we think of 2004 and we think of Ivan and the impacts and the costs on GDP and how many countries were impacted simultaneously by Ivan, and we go into 2017 and we think about Irma and Maria, two Cat 5 hurricanes within 2 weeks of each other, and one costing, for example, Dominica 227% of its 2016 GDP. We begin to, to focus a little more on what John has said, the impacts of climate change, or is it that we are also contributing to these impacts of climate change?
Right.
But also, I would say that when we think about these extreme events, for us at CRIF, it also means that there is less time in many cases for countries to recover from these devastating impacts. And if we think about Dominica again, 2015, they were impacted by Erica. And 2 years later, you had Maria. Less time to recover from the impacts of storms due to the increasing frequency and intensity of some of these hydrometeorological events. And of course, let us not go into drought because we're seeing similar occurrences, especially the impacts on agriculture and relationships with food security.
Okay, thank you, Liz. John, I want to come back to you. It is well known, it's a given. I mean, the data is there that global temperature is continuing to rise. And of course, it's happening here in the Caribbean already. What are the projections? I mean, from where you sit at the Institute, what are the projections as it relates to extreme weather in the Caribbean as climate change intensifies?
Well, it is a reality for sure. Every year we have, for example, the Hurricane Center and different entities would do projections, for example, in terms of hurricanes. And one of the things that drives hurricanes in terms of the intensity is heat. So indeed, if we are having higher temperatures, then the likelihood of greater and more intense storms is very much a living reality. So yes, it is pointing to that, and hence the reason why it's important to be aware of those things. However, the other twist of it is that we have moved from just giving ordinary forecasts to doing impact-based forecasting, right? So impact-based forecasting is what is this going to do, this system, how is it going to impact where it is going? Hurricanes, we know it can impact in terms of wind, rainfall amounts, storm surge. But we also want to look at it from the standpoint of how is it going to impact our socioeconomic activities, tourism, things like that. So indeed, with the projections that we are seeing in terms of higher temperatures, with it goes the reality that we can have more intense storms. But we have to be mindful also that we not just want to look at the more intense, the high-end system. Those smaller scale systems could have an impact in terms of the rainfall amounts that the smaller systems can produce, together with the forward speed of the systems. Because if a system is moving much faster, you may be able to probably focus on the wind impact, but when it's moving very slow, we also have to take into account now the amount of rainfall that it can contribute towards any locality as it moves across very slowly.
You know, what always baffles me, we hear about the two extremes, and I'm putting a lot of emphasis on our Caribbean area, the two extremes, extreme heat and extreme rain. So you have heavy downpours, and then you have a longer dry season, and you hear people complain that it's getting so hot, and sometimes you hear when you listen to a weather forecast that the temperature is probably 29 degrees, but it feels like 31 or 32. Could you explain that to us?
Right. So there are some times of the year, for example, now in March, and especially around August, September, what tends to happen those months, the sun is more directly overhead. So we have stronger, more direct radiation hitting our region in the tropics. And with it, it means that you may start to feel the what we call the midday sun effect as early as 8, 9 o'clock in the morning on some months, like especially around September. And that stays with you up to around 5 in the afternoon. Now, the overall temperature does not really go beyond 33 degrees Celsius those times. But what is happening is that, like a baker, if you keep your bread in the oven too long, it will develop high color compared to if you have it just at a short period of time. So there are other times in the year when the temperature of around 29, 30, 31 degrees Celsius would be felt between 11 in the morning up to about 3 in the afternoon. But there are times of the year when you have what I call the midday sun effect as early as 8 in the morning, going up to 5. So you're definitely in the so-called oven for a longer period of time. And you would feel from the human standpoint that the temperature is getting higher. But when we do the overall reading of the temperature, you never get it going beyond 33 degrees Celsius in those times.
Okay.
So that would tend to explain why we may feel uncomfortable as a human in terms of the temperature, but the temperature never really goes beyond the 33 degrees Celsius.
Right. Now there's another thing as it relates to, and in the introduction, I did mention about the warming seas or the warmer waters. They tend to strengthen because you hear a lot around the hurricane season, and when you have all these tropical waves and depressions all over the place, you hear things like, the ocean is warmer, and so you have more hurricanes. Why? I mean, why, if you have warmer oceans, you get more hurricanes?
Right. So hurricanes are living entity. Living entities need energy. Where do you get the energy from? The hurricanes, they will get the energy from the warm sea temperature. They also have where you have the process involved where they would also generate their own energy within. But they depend on the warm waters of the sea to feed the energy, to start the process, right? And hence the reason why we see that sometimes when these systems move over polar waters, they die out because it's a living entity. It needs energy to sustain its life.
So am I to understand that slow-moving system will tend to develop stronger because it's spending more time over the water and feeding from that warmth?
Well, if we are looking at it from a one-dimensional standpoint, we may want to say yes. But the atmosphere is very dynamic. And we cannot look at it in just this one-dimensional space, right? Even when we do the three-dimensional space, we sometimes have problems in fully understanding the processes because the atmosphere is what we call multi-dimensional space. The environment, the movement of particles, molecules, and so on, it's not inside of a control lab. Hence, if we just look at the warm sea surface temperature, we may say, okay, so if it's staying over the ocean a little longer, it should develop more. But there are other factors in the mid to upper levels that also contribute towards the survival, the strengthening, the development of these systems.
Okay, wonderful. One last question before I invite Liz to comment on anything, and then we go to the break. A lot of times we hear about the meteorologists and the meteorological observations and all of that. Just touch a little bit on that. What is the importance of that, the meteorological observations?
Right. So we have models that we input data in. And the models, when run, would give you some guidelines or guidance as to what to expect. Now, in every model run, there is an initial time step where the data is fed into the model, right? It could be climatological data, it could be current data. I have a very, very touching experience with Ivan. When Ivan would have passed, no, it was Emily, sorry. And based on the information that the Met Office in Grenada provided to the National Hurricane Center, they were able to make a decision regarding the next forward movement of Emily. So data put into the system is very, very important. And hence the reason why the data must be of quality, because it provides the initial time step for the guidance towards the future.
Okay, thank you, John. Liz, anything you'd like to add before we go to the break?
I have a lot to speak about later on, so not necessary.
Okay.
Just to underscore, though, the importance of data, because a lot of what we do at CRIF depend on data. And when I go into my presentation and we speak about parametric insurance and this whole model approach to insurance, then you recognize how key data is. And the fact that within our countries, we don't always have, I don't want to say good data, but we don't always have sufficient data, or we don't always have time series data to do some of this modeling that we want to do. So we need to look within the climate change space at statistical capacity within our countries. So just want to underscore that last point that John made.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Folks, we're going to take a commercial break. Stay with us. We have a lot more to share with you. Don't go away.
Or climate reality.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3.
Thinking about your new home? Think easy. Think a Republic Bank Home Easy Loan. Think affordable. Think convenience. Think Republic.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3. Republic makes home easy.
Wow, that was such a breeze.
Own your home with ease.
So whether laying that first brick or purchasing an existing home, we've got you covered. Republic Bank will get you those keys hassle-free in no time.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3.
Apply for a Home Easy Loan today for a chance to win a cash prize. Getting your new home is easy with Republic Bank.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Terms and conditions apply.
Solar Vision is the champion. We're lighting up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighting the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy. We're going green for security. We're going green for prosperity. We're going green with Solar Vision. We're going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
From the farm to the store to your home. Supporting farmers, catering for your needs. The Food Fair Supermarket provides fresh fruits and vegetables from its 2 convenient locations for over 5 decades. The Food Fair Supermarkets, where you can fill your baskets without emptying your pockets.
Is giving you more chances to multiply your Playway winnings by adding Multi-X to your regular Playway bets to win up to 5 times more. Imagine winning as much as $1,200 instead of $240 with a $10 Playway bet by simply adding Multi-X. Place your Playway bets from $1 to $10 or in increments on your favorite Playway symbols or numbers. Then add the Multi-X option at the same value to win 2 times, 3 times, 5 times more. more, or free plays. With Multi-X, you must bet the same amount wagered on your regular playway bets for your winnings to be multiplied. Grenadians, value your dreams and win your way as much as 5 times more. With Multi-X added to playway and watch your money grow. Coming soon to authorized agents near you. Must be 18 years or older to play. NLA, making your dreams come true.
Welcome back, everyone. It's our climate reality. For those of you just joining us, we welcome you. And we're talking extreme weather events this evening. We have Mr. John Peters from the CIMH and Ms. Elizabeth Emmanuel from the CCRIF. We are going to bring on Ms. Emmanuel now to share with us some information. But before we do that, we have a very interesting video we'd like to share with you. And following that, Ms. Emmanuel will do a presentation. So can we have the video, please? Thank you.
The work and impact of CRIF in the Caribbean and Central America. Following Hurricane Ivan in 2004 and the devastation across the Caribbean, CARICOM heads of government approached the World Bank for assistance to design and implement a cost-effective risk financing program for member governments that would provide them with access to quick liquidity following a natural disaster. This marked the beginning of what would become the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, CRIF. Now CRIF SPC, the world's first and most successful multi-country, multi-peril risk pool based on parametric insurance. CRIF is a regional catastrophe fund for Caribbean and Central American governments to limit the financial impact of devastating hurricanes, earthquakes, and excess rainfall events by providing quick financial liquidity when a policy is triggered. CRIF operates as a development insurance company as the products and services it provides are for the benefit of the facility's members. CRIF is also a captive insurance company because its parametric insurance products attract risks that are priced too high by the traditional markets. CRIF provides a bespoke insurance solution that enables it to provide unique and tailored insurance coverage that is not readily available in the commercial market. Today, CRIF offers 5 parametric insurance products for tropical cyclones based on wind and storm surge, earthquakes based on ground shaking, excess rainfall based on volume of rainfall, the fisheries sector, and the electric utilities sector for transmission and distribution. But what is parametric insurance? Parametric insurance covers the probability of a predefined event happening, for example, a major hurricane or earthquake, instead of indemnifying actual loss incurred, and pays out according to a predefined scheme. Parametric insurance insures a policyholder against the occurrence of a specific event by paying a set amount based on the magnitude of the event, as opposed to the magnitude of the losses in a traditional indemnity policy. Parametric insurance makes a payment upon the occurrence of a triggering event and is detached from a specific underlying physical asset or piece of infrastructure. Parametric insurance makes payments based on the intensity of an event, for example, hurricane wind speed, earthquake intensity, volume of rainfall, and the amount of loss calculated in a pre-agreed catastrophe model caused by these events. Today, CRIF has 24 members, 8 more than the original 16 governments that joined in 2007. 19 governments from the Caribbean, 3 from Central America, and 2 Caribbean electric utility companies. CRIF has demonstrated that catastrophe risk insurance can effectively provide a level of financial protection for countries vulnerable to natural disasters. Since 2007, CRIF has made 58 payouts totaling $260 million to 16 member governments. Assessments have revealed that CRIF payouts have benefited over 3.5 million persons in the Caribbean and Central America. Most of CRIF payouts, more than 60%, has been used by governments to address immediate needs post-disaster, from providing food, water, and medicines to clearing roads. Also, payouts have been used for repairing critical infrastructure, such as schools, supporting the tourism sector post-disaster so that the country does not miss the upcoming tourist season, while hotels await payouts from their indemnity insurance, and supporting the agriculture sector, and so on. The importance of catastrophe risk insurance, especially in the face of a changing climate, cannot be overemphasized and must be viewed as an essential component within government's fiscal policy frameworks and an important tool of changing climate adaptation as we strive to advance the sustainability agenda to achieve the SDGs.
Very good. And the folks, after these extreme events, and we've experienced Hurricane Ivan and Emily, and we've heard about, other Caribbean islands who've gone through some terrible, terrible hurricanes. Remember the Bahamas, Dominica, quite a few of them. And in the early 80s, Jamaica, St. Lucia. We've had it. We've had it in the Caribbean. And so, having to bounce back or having to come back from all of these events, we need help. We need support, And so CRIF was formed to do just that. Mr. Manuel, we've heard a lot about CRIF as a measure that can assist in coping with the impacts of, these extreme events. Can you explain to us what the CRIF is and how it can assist in coping with these extreme events?
Okay, so I think the video did some of that, but I will go on a little further because CRIF was really designed to help countries financially protect their economies following a natural disaster. What happens immediately after a natural disaster is the need for quick liquidity to support the most needy in a population, quick liquidity to support infrastructure, for example. And following Hurricane Ivan, what we saw was that several countries were impacted simultaneously. Governments just did not have cash to support each other. And that is why the CARICOM heads of government approached the World Bank to come up with a solution that could enable them to access quick money following a natural disaster. And the studies led to the birth of CRIF, which of course, as the video said, is the world's first multi-country, multi-peril risk pool based on parametric insurance. This type of insurance was chosen simply because unlike your regular indemnity insurance, which requires assessments on the ground, parametric insurance does not require those assessments and allows for payouts within 14 days. So we have seen examples across the board where once we have a natural disaster event, such as a hurricane or an earthquake, we know within hours what that country's payout can be and how that country can be supported. So in the case, for example, and in some cases, whilst all our payouts are made within 14 days, we have been providing portions of payouts to countries because we know what that payout will be within a few days. And payouts have been used, for example, in the case of St. Lucia following Hurricane Thomas in 2010 to actually repair their main water treatment plant, which of course was a feeder for other treatment plants, smaller plants. And we know, for example, what happens after a hurricane and what happens with water and what could happen as a result of not having water, increasing, for example, gastrointestinal diseases, etc., etc. And we have seen, for example, where countries have used their payouts just to support medical teams. In the case of Haiti 2010, there were several pledges to Haiti. And 6 months after that event, they had received less than 50% of the pledges, but they have received within 14 days of the event 10 times their insurance premium of close to $8 million, which did go a long way to support medical personnel to keep the wheels of government turning. So what CRIF provides is that we provide products that are not readily available in traditional insurance markets. So we're providing products for hurricanes or tropical cyclones, for earthquakes, for rainfall. And what CRIF parametric insurance is all about, it's about disaster risk financing. How do we finance disasters when they happen? CRIF is not a silver bullet. So at the same time, countries are required to engage in their disaster risk mitigation activities, climate-proof their sectors, as we look at climate change adaptation, remembering as well that there are other types of financing instruments. So for example, as it says in the acronym, catastrophe. So it's for those less frequent, more impactful events. So it's not necessarily designed to accommodate just a seasonal flood, for example, but those events that can be devastating, allowing governments to support the most vulnerable in their economy. As the video would have indicated, and I mean, we can do a whole session on parametric insurance, and what it is, we make payments on the intensity of an event, and governments determine when, for example, they would want to receive payments. So they decide before in their policies, how much risk am I going to transfer to CRIF? What intensity event I do not think that our local funds can cover, or funds on the ground, and that is sort of the basis of that. So you're looking at calculating losses in this pre-agreed model that happens even before the event takes place. And it is a sort of proactive way of planning. So you're saying, if we have a hurricane of X magnitude with X wind speed, this is what we would want to take out an insurance policy with CRIF for. We make payouts quickly, as I said before, and it is considered a cost-effective way to finance quick liquidity following a natural disaster. Because as persons sometimes aren't aware, after a natural disaster, many countries get what is referred to as debt relief from development partners, etc. Oftentimes, that debt relief is not necessarily a grant, but it can be a loan, and loans add to existing debt stock of countries. So CRIF becomes a way to pre-finance short-term liquidity. It does not necessarily provide financing for longer-term reconstruction and redevelopment efforts, but that space between the disaster happening and the longer-term recovery efforts. So what we really do is we fill what is referred to as the liquidity gap, right? That point where government really does not have resources to support the most needy in its population. I would just like to add, for example, that we can make payouts of up to 150 million per peril for each country. And currently we cover tropical cyclone, rainfall, earthquake. We also cover transmission and distribution of the electric utility sector, the lines and poles. It's not very easy for electric utility companies to access insurance, regular indemnity insurance for their transmission and distribution systems. The cost is prohibitive. The risks are extremely high because of the level of exposure to natural events of these lines and the exposure of the poles to natural events. So CRIF has come in and found a solution to provide parametric insurance, not to generation, but just for distribution and transmission. So we currently have 2 electric utility companies as members, Lucilec from St. Lucia, as well. The first member, of course, was Anglec, and we're working very closely with Carilec to bring more countries on board. And there has been strong interest across countries, because we all know when those lines and poles are impacted over time, we as consumers end up paying those bills. And even where there is funds in place by these utility companies to absorb some of the losses, it's not enough. And again, we're talking about the frequency and intensity of events. So even if you had enough to cover in your reserves an event today, what if an event happened tomorrow? You would not have enough resources to cover that. I'll stop there. So I know you have the question.
But I do have a couple of the questions. Now, of course, insurance does cover various sectors. As it relates to CRIF, and you mentioned, intensity and all of that. You also mentioned the electricity and all of that. What about agriculture, the agricultural sector? Do you provide support there? For example, in Ivan, Grenada was, our nutmeg especially got really a bad hit. Would you support sectors like that?
Okay, so as we said, let me just backtrack a little bit. Yes, we are. I'll answer that question in two ways. One, for countries that receive payouts from CRIF currently, we do have examples of where that support would have gone to the agricultural sector, so the payout. So in the case of Hurricane Matthew that affected St. Lucia in 2016, most of that payout went to banana farmers to help them get back on the ground, to sort of drain fields, do whatever they had to do to get back into production, right? But in terms of offering diverse products, so currently we have our base products for tropical cyclone, rainfall, earthquake, etc. And using our base products, we are able to develop other products. So our base product, for example, surge, our model for rainfall focuses on rainfall. So we were able to use those base products to put on the table a policy for the fishery sector. It was the first such policy of its kind designed to support fisherfolk, not just fishermen, but the women who are employed to the fishery sector. And for example, Grenada has a coast policy. So just to say that, it was one of the first two countries in the world to purchase parametric insurance for their fishery sector that takes into account all the players in the sector, including, for example, the boat boys who clean the boat, the women who sell in the fish markets, should there be a catastrophe event that affects the country and affects the fishery sector. From these base products, we could also develop other products for other sectors. So as I mentioned earlier, we're able to develop a product for the electric utilities. Governments are demanding a product for agriculture. So it is something that we are working on that would capture, for example, wind, rain. It would also capture flood, drought, and storm surge. So those would be the perils that an agricultural product that we will develop look at. We've had some interest as well from the tourism sector for a product that will address the needs of the sector, and so a product that would focus on, for example, wind speed, storm surge, as well as rainfall and flooding. We've also had, for example, interestingly, governments have approached us for a product for government stuff and government infrastructure, not roads per se, but buildings in particular. And in many of our Caribbean countries, governments do own a large quantity of housing stock. Governments also own, for example, hospitals, police stations, schools, many of which are not insured by indemnity insurance, many of which can be impacted by significant events, such as hurricanes and earthquakes. And we're also working with the World Bank on a product related to housing stock. In addition to which, we are working on a product for vulnerable groups. And this is a livelihood protection policy in which we're working with the Munich Climate Change Insurance Initiative, with the government, with support from the German government, working with, for example, the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative, the ILO Impact Insurance, as well as the Guardian Insurance Group, to roll out a product for vulnerable persons, such as farmers, fishers, tourism workers, many of which are seasonal. So they are oftentimes impacted by events, by climate-related events. They are not full-time staff at hotels. We have, for example, our musicians who are also impacted by climate change, persons who operate micro and small businesses who are impacted by these events, whose livelihoods need to be protected. And within that context, we're also looking at how policies like these, like the livelihood protection policy, whilst designed for vulnerable groups, how can governments participate in utilizing these policies as part of their disaster risk finance strategies, for example, within their social protection policy? So in the event of a natural disaster, governments, through their social development ministries and through their social protection policies, can see their social protection systems expanding both horizontally and vertically due to a payout to support not just the current vulnerable, but the near vulnerable in the population who can be impacted by these disaster-related events.
Okay.
So,
yeah. I have another question, but I want to bring in John here. I'm sure, John, is there anything you'd like to maybe comment on, or maybe you might have a question you want to throw at Liz? I think you're muted, John. You need to unmute. I think you're muted. Yes.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes, it's interesting that we're talking climate change, climate variability, and insurance, because I recall after Ivan, there was the concern that, okay, when compared to Janet, we seem to have one hurricane every 50 years. So why spend all this money on insurance? Well, little did we know that 1 year after we had Emily. So we cannot look at it as one in every 50 because the next one could come immediately. And so I'm glad that, the insurance sector has brought in the need for governments to see how important it is to be able to have a system like that would support whenever a disaster strikes.
Okay, wonderful. Liz, I want to come back to you because we've been hearing also, from the last climate change COP about an agreement to establish a loss and damage fund to assist countries in addressing the impacts of climate change. Is this loss and damage fund an insurance fund, and how can Grenada and other Caribbean islands benefit from that?
But I'll tell you a little bit about the loss and damage fund, which for many who followed the proceedings or those who attended the COP, it was a huge highlight of the UN Climate Change Conference last year, 2022. And this loss and damage fund, of course, discussions around this fund has been going on for years. Pressuring, the developing countries have been pressuring or pushing for this fund. And this fund really aims to provide financial assistance to nations that are most impacted by climate change. Of course, the fund is not yet fully finalized. The details of it in terms of how it will be structured, who will provide resources for it, how much will be paid, who will manage it. We expect much of that to come to the table this year at COP28 in December of 2023, when the fund is expected to become operational. There currently is in place a transitional committee of 24 members that's really looking at what the structure of financing of the fund will be. But I could touch a little bit on some of the possible financing sources, which is expected to come from several areas. And I think many of us were aware that the Honorable Mia Mottley, in her presentation at COP, articulated much about loss and damage, much about having a fund for loss of damage, to the point where she was able to provide several proposed initiatives and strategies, which would become coined the Bridgestone Initiative coming out of COP. And she presented 5 key proposals that we would look closely at. One was this one-time $650 billion request of the IMF to support climate financing in developing countries, which of course would allow us to access concessional financing in developing countries, something that we have been talking about for several years. And the fact that because many of our countries are considered by the Human Development Index as high-income developing countries, we have been having difficulties to access concessional financing for climate change. The proposals also include a request of multilateral development banks to issue $1 trillion in low-interest loans or concessional financing for climate financing on various development projects with interest rates of between 1% to 4%, because as we know, the standard borrowing rates for the Global South can be as high as 12 to 14%. Another interesting proposal coming out of this Bridgetown initiative was a tax on oil companies to finance reconstruction grants that would be dispensed to developing countries after climate disasters, and which could be classified as loss and damage financing. Pretty interesting as well was the temporary pausing of countries' outstanding loan repayments, whether they were loans by the governments, held by the governments or private creditors, following climate-related disasters, allowing countries some time to begin to recover without having to take additional funding or what we would normally refer to as debt relief. So can we stop our loan repayments and use that money to support redevelopment efforts, thereby not increasing our debt stock as we seek to redevelop from these events? And I think another, and this can go into the really looking at another proposal, was the whole link between trying to find ways to stimulate the private sector, stimulate certain sectors so that they can climate proof and reduce the impacts of climate change. So really looking deeply at how, for example, we climate proof our tourism sector, how we climate proof agriculture, what is required there. Do we need to quickly develop national adaptation plans for our sectors? We have sectors, for example, like micro and small economies or MSMEs across the Caribbean who are significantly impacted by climate-related events. What can we do to climate-proof them to ensure that they become more resilient and can recover faster and build back stronger from some of these events?
Right, thank you very much. So we're going to take our final break. When we come back, I just want us to look briefly at some mitigation measures and then, our closing remarks, because that 1 hour goes by so fast. So stay with us, folks. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
Solar Vision is the champion. We're lighting up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighting the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. Going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3.
Thinking about your new home? Think easy. Think a Republic Bank Home Easy Loan. Think affordable. Think convenience. Think Republic.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3. Republic makes home easy.
Wow, that was such a breeze.
Own your home with ease.
So whether laying that first brick or purchasing an existing home, we've got you covered. Republic Bank will get you those keys hassle-free in no time.
Home is easy as 1, 2, 3.
Apply for a Home Easy Loan today for a chance to win a cash prize. Getting your new home is easy with Republic Bank.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Terms and conditions apply.
Hubbard's is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
Welcome back, everyone. It's our climate reality, and we're getting close to wrap-up time, but I want to just go back to Liz quickly. One quick question before we wrap, Liz. Or is CRIF involved in small grants for, let's say, like NGOs or other organizations? Or for that matter, would CRIF be in a position to support like awareness programs, like what we're doing now to heighten awareness on the issue of climate change?
Yes, I mean, in short, the answer is yes, definitely. We do have in place a program, a specific program that focuses on providing grants to communities. We focus on providing scholarships, internships across the Caribbean. And I think one of the things I'd like to speak about this small grants program that we have, there is no call for proposal. It's always open. And we encourage communities, academic institutions, etc., to apply for these grants through our website at CRIF, www.crif.org, and look for technical assistance, look for small grants program. And you can receive grants between $5,000 and $25,000. There are some NGOs, for example, who have applied for grants. They have applied for one project, and at the end of that project, they have applied for other projects. And just to give you some examples of projects. So for example, we have worked with an NGO out of Barbados to build the capacity of small farmers to implement best practices in climate change adaptation in Dominica, St. Vincent and St. Lucia, reforestation and nursery projects. We have had several of those projects across Haiti. One of the very interesting projects we've had is with an NGO out of Trinidad called I Am Movement, where they have been using something called Better for Grass, implementing a nature-based solution to prevent erosion and to facilitate community development and to support farmers. We've had projects in training with earthquakes, and also development of disaster risk management plans. We've had construction of things like footbridges in communities. So a range of projects can be accommodated here. We've also very much interested in supporting our children. We recently launched, about a year ago, a book, not a booklet, and I don't think you'll get to see it, but it's called Hazards, Disasters, and Climate Change, off screen. Hazards, Disasters, and Climate Change, which is actually designed for children ages 8 to 12 to begin to understand the impacts of climate change. It is narrated by 8 Caribbean children, 9 children from across the Caribbean. And of course, we do have these books available for communities, for schools, etc., for libraries. So please contact us and we can send you copies.
Right, thank you very much. So we're practically out of time, but I would like to allow both yourself and John 2 minutes quickly as part of your closing remarks to speak on how can the citizens play a role in all of that? In other words, to mitigate against extreme events. And John, we can start with you.
Well, I always think that one way is to build awareness, right? Without the public being aware, then most of what sometimes the meteorologists talk about, the people would not be in sync with. And that means that if a disaster is pending, then we could be caught off guard. So building awareness and the action that needs to be taken. So an effective early warning system means that we provide all the warnings on time, but also action need to be taken. And these actions should be taken before, and understanding the possible impact it has on the various sectors. And that might be too much to go into the various sectors. But for example, one could look at the building code, the structure that they are in, how they can, reinforced, because it would have been so nice if we could have click and drag the island from the part of the system, but we cannot do that. So one would have to take action in order to mitigate.
Right. Liz, your closing remarks on actions that the citizens can take to mitigate, of course, from where you sit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I want to put a plug in for environmental management, ecosystems management. I think we often do not recognize how important our ecosystems are, like our forests, or coral reefs, or watersheds, or mangroves, to helping to protect us from these climate-related events. So really making a plug in terms of how we manage the ecosystems around us, even encouraging, investments in reversing some of the damage to our ecosystems. When we think of flooding, it's really a secondary hazard, right? It's not a primary hazard. The primary hazard is the rain. And if, for example, we had our forests intact, our watersheds intact, much of the damage and destruction we see as a result of flooding could be abated. When we think of our coral reefs and we think of our farmers, can we, not just farmers, but can we reduce, for example, land-based sources of pollution that result in the overgrowth of algae on our coral reefs? So corals can, how do we maintain the integrity of these reefs to be able to carry out their function? One key one is really literally reducing the impact of storm surge coming from tropical cyclones or hurricanes by being able to really zap out the energy. But if our coral reef health index is low and negative, we're going to continue to see these negative impacts of these natural events. So I think it's important that communities protect the ecosystems that they live in, reside in, that we do not destroy them, as well as governments also recognizing the importance of ecosystems as key climate ecosystems by themselves as climate change adaptation strategies, and seeking to invest more in rehabilitating these systems.
Thank you very much, Liz. And of course, John, I thank you all both very much for accepting our invitation to be on this program to share with us such pertinent information about extreme weather events, climate change, and of course, the importance of insurance, in helping to come back from extreme weather events. I want to close by saying climate change is expected to worsen the frequency, intensity, and impacts of some types of extreme weather. And of course, with continued increased rising temperatures, we can expect more extreme weather events. We have to be more resilient. We have to pay attention to what is happening around us. Climate change is real. That's our program this evening. Be sure to join us next Wednesday for another episode of our Climate Reality. Do have a good night.
Our Climate Reality is brought to you with the kind compliments of Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.